Hey, how's it going? For decades and decades, the spaceplane dream has been to launch horizontally from a runway, fly through the atmosphere like a plane, using jet engines, and then be able to boost into space and then return to a runway all in one piece. Now, the closest we ever got to that was Skylon. Skylon was a spaceplane design created by a British company called Reaction Engines Limited. It promised to be the first horizontal takeoff and landing single-stage to orbit craft that the world had ever seen. It would have been amazing too. Unfortunately, Reaction Engines Limited only got so far before funding got pulled and the company f***ing died. A lot of folks naturally assumed that that was GG for the whole spaceplane dream, given that Starship is a thing now. Kind of. But there's been recent news of a potential successor to Skylon, which might actually happen, which is a prospect that has me feeling all warm and nostalgic in my general undercarriage region, so let's go ahead and check it out. So, Skylon was a horizontal takeoff and landing, single stage to orbit spaceplane. Horizontal takeoff and landing meaning it can just take off from a runway like a normal plane, instead of standing upright like a regular rocket. And single stage to orbit meaning there's no bits that like drop off of it. Like you could design something like a plane that goes to orbit that has separate jet engines and rocket engines, and then I guess you could jettison the jet engines when you're not using them anymore. If you wanted to maximize the amount of cargo you can get into space with the rocket engines. But Skylon wanted to do this all in one stage. It was going to be just one solid plane, nothing would like fall off of it at any point during the journey, and it just had some actuated doors with a cargo hold inside of it that you could put cargo in, but the cargo could also be people, potentially. Now, the key to making this whole thing work is that you need engines that can fly up into the atmosphere, but then also get into space. And the engines really were the key design element that needed to be worked out for Skylon to work. The engines were called Sabre engines, and yeah, they were the main innovation. They were hydrogen-fueled, hybrid jet rocket engines. I'm pretty sure I was waiting for them to finish working on these things before they even introduced the Rapier engines in KSP-1. That's how long I've been following this shit. So it's important to understand aerodynamics acts in different ways at different speeds. Like if you just took a passenger plane and, I don't know, made it go at Mach 1.5, those engines would be deleted very quickly. The engine compressors would stall out, the blades would fall to pieces really quick. If something's gonna go over the speed of sound, it's important that it be designed to do that. The big problem is that you need to go slow first to be going fast eventually, right? Like even the SR-71 Blackbird needs to take off from the runway, which means it starts going 0 miles per hour and has to speed up. Now, most of these supersonic jet planes, like the SR-71 or like the Concorde, do something a little bit clever to make this work. Their engines have variable geometry. In the case of the SR-71, it kind of turned from a turbojet at slower speeds into a ramjet at higher speeds. A ramjet being when the air is just forced into the engine by how fast the vehicle is going already. The thing is though, the SR-71 only goes at Mach 3. Skylon needed to go to Mach 5.5 just to get to the point where it could then switch to rocket engines, and then it needs to go the rest of the way, all the way up to orbital velocity to get into orbit. So the main innovation in the Sabre engines was something called a pre-cooler. So the SR-71, if you tried to make that go at Mach 5, because it's just made out of metal, the engine would melt. The variable geometry of the engines was designed in such a way that you could squeak your way up to Mach 3, but the reality was if it started going much faster than that, the engines would have actually started to melt, because the temperature of the air getting jammed into those jet engines would have exceeded the melting point of, I think, titanium that it was made out of. What the Sabre engine managed to do was have this pre-cooler section. So you could just have this jet engine going, and you could have air coming into it that's over 1,000 degrees centigrade, and within a fraction of a second, it would be super chilled, and at that point, it would actually be useful in the engine. The Sabre engine had that innovation, but also, it was unique in that on top of that, you could also use the variable geometry trick, but instead of doing the SR-71 thing and sort of kind of approximating a ramjet, it would actually just seal off the air intake completely and use internal oxygen, basically turning the outlets of those jet engines into rocket engines. And since then it's using internal fuel and internal oxygen, it can go all the way to space, no problem. Now, the airframe would also have been a challenge as well. I think they were going to use some kind of ceramic material for it, which has got a higher melting point than metal. You know, they don't want the entire thing to just turn to flubber when it goes at high speeds. But really, the main innovation was those Sabre engines and the pre-cooler inside of them. Now, this thing would have only been able to take about 17 tons to low Earth orbit, and I know that seems a little bit pathetic next to the 100-ton to orbit Starship that hypothetically might be a thing. But bear in mind, this thing, I imagine, would be a lot more comfy for passengers versus having Starship rearrange your organs. Sorry to interrupt, this is just a quick message to say, statistically speaking, you're probably not subscribed, so I'll make you a deal. Press the subscribe button and I won't come over to your house and do this.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday, and right now, you can save £50.
Alright, thanks, back to the video. Skylon's like that sleek, sophisticated space plane from 2001: A Space Odyssey, whereas launching on Starship would feel a bit more like sitting on top one of those hammer games at a carnival and letting the mountain from Game of Thrones wallop you into the f***ing stratosphere. Anyway, Reaction Engines Limited just ran out of funding and died, so unfortunately Skylon and Saber just kind of ceased to exist, and everyone was just kind of like, alright, well, that's over. But maybe not, because there's recent news that there's a new project called Invictus. Banger name, by the way, that's very cool. That's up there with Turbo Barbarian and Big Chungus. So Invictus, if you look at it and you squint, it just looks like Skylon. In fact, the program is being led by Fraser-Nash Consultancy, who have absorbed a bunch of the team that used to work at Reaction Engines Limited. So this thing's basically just Skylon 2 Electric Boogaloo, except now with fat stacks of cash. Oh yeah, 7 million euros. That's not much, actually. Yeah, this really might be Skylon 2 when they run out of money in about 3 weeks. I don't know, I mean, they might keep getting more money. It is funded by the European Space Agency, so I guess if things are going well, maybe they'll keep throwing money at it. I don't know. It's probably good for the UK because I imagine this could be considered a hypersonic weapons project, technically. So I'd assume it would contribute to the percentage that we're spending on not just the military, but, you know, things around it to meet whatever the NATO goal is going up to. Is it like 5% they want to get it to at some point? They say they want to get the first flight by 2031. I wonder if they've hired Elon Musk to do their scheduling for them, because that seems incredibly f***ing optimistic. Anyway, sounding like the immediate goal over the next 12 months is to deliver the preliminary design for the full flight system. I guess that might be what the 7 million is for, is just to develop a design in the first place, maybe not to build anything. Oh, I just found a good quote here. The head of the European Space Agency's mechanical department states that hypersonic flight is not just the next frontier of aerospace, it is the gateway to a new paradigm of mobility, defense, and space access. Defense, yeah, it's going to count towards that NATO percentage, isn't it? Pretty sure the UK Space Agency already invested £50 million into Saber development, and Skylon still went bust, so it's interesting that they're this optimistic about 7 million euros. I also found this little interesting tidbit. Check this out. While the original vision of a single stage to orbit spaceplane faces ongoing technical challenges, the developers are exploring a pragmatic pathway towards a 2-stage to orbit system, potentially featuring a highly reusable first stage operating in a horizontal takeoff and landing configuration with a more expendable upper stage for the final push to orbit. So what, they're just gonna bolt a f***ing missile to the top of this thing and that's the thing that gets to space? Am I misunderstanding that? So in a nutshell, it seems like they're not actually making an SSTO. This thing isn't actually going to space. What it is a Mach 5 hypersonic research platform. They're basically taking the Saber engine, not doing the rocket bit of it, but keeping the pre-cooler bit of it, making a hypersonic engine that actually works. So Invictus itself may never get to space, because that might not be the point of it, but it might lead to an actual spaceplane design at some point that would actually get to space, or as they say, you can strap stuff to it and fire that to space and use it as a 2-stage system. I guess that pre-cooler design was just too good to leave sitting on a shelf somewhere, because from what I gather, it's basically magic. Anyway, it's very cool that they're jumping off from the existing Saber technology. I would absolutely, and I cannot emphasize enough, f***ing directly into my pants if we got something even approximating Skylon, because it's such a cool idea. It's kind of iconically British, actually. You know, you have an excellent idea for something, you have excellent engineers working on it, and then just no money and nothing happens. So hopefully this turns into actually something, you know, give me one whole thing to be patriotic about.
Big Chungus sends his regards.
Anyway, if nothing else, the current renders for it look cool. If they're to be believed, it's keeping a similar aesthetic, you know, makes it look like the bastard offspring of a double-ended black dildo with the arc bird from Ace Combat 5. Anyway, I just thought that was really cool news. Skylon 2, maybe. I just like Skylon, so I thought I'd talk about it. Join the channel on my Patreon if you want to support what I do. Big thanks as always to my elite level channel members, Thunderbolt22A10. When he's traveling past a black hole, it doesn't just suck, it also swallows. Nomad Greg. Space isn't silent, it's just terrified of insulting him. Yannick Spathe. Whenever you're in a plane and there's turbulence, it's actually just him astral projecting into the soul of the plane and then having a seizure. Andrew Maul. The speed of light is so fast because he's the one that's chasing it. John Bejarano. You ever seen Valles Marineris on Mars? Yep, that was him. And thanks to all my other members too. I'll catch you in the next one. Over and out.